So I'm coming up on a year with the Canon R6 Mark II as my main hybrid camera, my main YouTube camera, my main photography camera. This camera's gotten a lot of work over the last year, and I kind of want to talk about hybrid cameras in general, all the different options that are out there on the market, and why I still think the R6 Mark II is a great value even a year later. We're at a really incredible time in the market today in the world of cameras. We have so many amazing options from so many different great brands, from Sony, Nikon, Panasonic, Canon, all these different brands that are offering these great hybrid options. The Lumix series from Panasonic has been really popular as of late. They've come out with some crazy cool stuff with the S5 Mark II. And then you obviously have Sony constantly coming out with new cameras in this mid-tier price range that have amazing specs. And then you have Nikon, who's even kind of pushing more lately. And then you have Canon, where we haven't really seen a lot of new options. We have the R8 that's come out this year, which is a great camera, but it does lack some features, but it's also at a really great price, like $1,500. So we have all these amazing cameras, and truly there really is no bad option. This is not one of those Team Canon, Team Sony, Team Panasonic. Like, I'm not drawing any hard lines in the sand. I just happen to be in the Canon ecosystem. I've used them for years, and I've not had any major issues to the point that has caused me to want to switch. I don't feel that my gear and my Canon cameras are holding me back in any way. But what I'm really trying to talk about is the importance of picking gear that works for you and with you and not against you, and stuff that you're going to be comfortable using, and why I think the R6 Mark II can be that camera for a lot of people. There's one thing about Canon cameras that to me sets them apart from other brands, and that is ergonomics. In today's market, you have camera brands talking about getting cameras smaller and lighter and thinner and all this stuff. And cameras getting smaller is a great thing if you're just a photographer and you're walking around carrying a camera all day. But if you're a filmmaker and you're shooting any type of handheld footage, the bigger and the heavier the camera, honestly, sometimes is better. Obviously, there's limits to where it gets not so great, but generally you want some weight to your camera so that your footage is stable when you're shooting handheld. I shoot a ton of handheld. So for me, that's why I like the C70. It's a great balance. I can rig it up really heavy if I want, or I can also slim it down, but it's still heavy enough to allow me to get great handheld footage without having tons of micro jitters. And that's what I feel Canon offers, even with their hybrid stuff like the R6 Mark II. This camera is nice in the hand. It feels good. It's not overly thin. It's not overly boxy. It's well-rounded. It's easy to hold. And if you want to rig it up to make it heavier, you can, which you can do with all cameras. But to me, the ergonomics of Canon cameras are really great and are kind of a slept-on part of what they offer. Most of the talking heads that you guys see on this channel are going to be shot with the R6 Mark II, at least over the last year. Occasionally, I use the C70, but for the most part, like right now, I'm shooting on the Mark II. And I just find that the dynamic range, the skin tones, the colors, the sharpness, this oversampled 6K sensor looks fantastic. The autofocus is fantastic. It never misses. I just find the image of this camera to be extremely flattering and extremely pleasing to the eye, and the colors are, again, just wonderful. Now, yes, this camera doesn't have the dynamic range that my C70 has. The C70 is definitely obviously better, but for the most part, this thing works great in most controlled environments. Even right now, I have my windows open, and now it's cloudy outside, it's getting darker, but you can absolutely shoot in an environment like this with windows open. As long as you have the right lighting inside, you can make the dynamic range work. You get about 13 stops with this camera, and honestly, for most time, you don't need much more than that if you are in a good environment. I love that this camera has uncropped 4K 60 footage. It's nice to be able to have that full frame with no limitations there. I also love that it has no recording limits. That's been a great update to this camera as opposed to the original R6. And you just have a little bit of a higher resolution sensor, so if you really do want 6K RAW, you can do that with HDMI out. And it's just a lot of options, a lot of versatility. You can put it up big, you can bring it down small. And I just find that the oversampled 6K image off the sensor just looks incredibly sharp. So if you want a high key corporate kind of a look, or you're just looking for all that detail, this is definitely the camera to use over something like a C70 because of the oversampled 6K image. You're just gonna get more detail and more precision, as opposed to the C70 is gonna look a little bit more filmic, a little bit softer, but sometimes you need that more clinical look. And that's what I like this R6 for stuff like this, like these talking heads, where I want it to be detailed and I want it to look sharp and nice, and you pair that with like a black satin filter or some kind of mist filter, it just creates this perfect balance of sharpness but also a nice soft filmic look. And I just find the image off this camera looks fantastic. I've used it on a handful of different scenarios, from very run and gun environments to more controlled environments like I'm shooting now, and it's performed great. It performs very similarly to the original R6, which was already fantastic. Again, as long as you're not in extreme high dynamic range situations, this camera is going to perform just fine and look great. And honestly, this camera is pretty slept on in terms of low light. It does really, really well, surprisingly well for Canon cameras. Normally we think of Sony when you think of low light kings, and they are the low light king. Don't get me wrong, they make the best low light cameras, but this camera is still very, very capable, and it by all means does everything I needed to do in terms of low light. The other part of this camera is the photos. I think this is one of the best photography cameras on the market for the money. The 24 megapixel sensor is plenty, it's more than enough, and you have 40 frames a second burst mode, which is incredible for those high action moments when you're trying to capture that fast moving subject and make sure every frame is there, and you want great autofocus on top of that, then this camera is for you. For me, I've always just loved Canon cameras for photography. I just find that the images are always beautiful. Again, the colors are great, autofocus is great. I love all of my old EF glass, all my Sigma Art Series glass, so I just adapt into this camera, but even the few RF lenses I have are also fantastic. To me, it's just the perfect camera for hybrid shooting, especially with the new video photo switch that switches you from the different modes very quickly. That's a perfect addition. It's exactly what this camera needed, so you can really be taking photos and videos simultaneously, it feels like, and switch very fast back and forth. The camera's snappy, autofocus is snappy, and the custom video modes are great, custom photo modes are great. It's really just the perfect camera for doing those one-man band shoots where you have to grab some photos and you need to grab some video as well. It's just perfect for that. Now let's talk about the few things that I don't like about this camera. One is the wobble in the IBIS. It's still there, it's better, but it's not perfect. So if you're shooting anything wider than like 24 mil or right at 24 mil, you're gonna notice some of the wobble. It's definitely better than the original R6, but it is very much still a thing. So keep that in mind. If you do a lot of vlogging, this may not be the best camera for that. Or if you're gonna vlog wider than 24 mil, just turn the IBIS off if that's really gonna bother you. Now on the flip side of that, the IBIS is absolutely fantastic when using longer lenses. It's some of the best in the game, especially for photos, low light photos. You know, when you roll that shutter back and you wanna get a little bit more of a long exposure, you can actually do some handheld stuff and get some good results. And for video, the IBIS is great, especially paired with a stabilized lens. You can get some really, really impressive results, but it's just shooting wider where the wobble shows up. It just gets on my nerves. The other thing I don't like about this camera is I really wish it had full-size HDMI. I absolutely despise micro HDMI. It's the worst port ever made. It's so fragile. I can't tell you how many cables I've broken. Even with the right angle cables, they still break. So really would love to see full HDMI on this if they update it to a Mark III or something like that. It should have been that to begin with. I don't know why we're 2 iterations of this camera in and we're still using micro HDMI. It's just ridiculous. We need full HDMI on a camera like this. Other than those few things, there's really not much about this camera that I don't like. It's performed really well for me. It's never overheated. It's always performed great. Autofocus is fantastic. I've never had any major issues. Then that doesn't mean that it's perfect. It doesn't mean that the dynamic range is always enough. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have its quirks. Sometimes you're just gonna have to understand that it's not gonna have some features that you may want, or it's gonna perform poorly in certain areas because of the price. But that's where value comes in. And I think this camera is a perfect value for the money. So for me, the Canon R6 is my perfect hybrid camera still at the end of 2023. That does not mean that won't change. It may change a month from now. It may change 6 months from now, but it still performs great, and it will still perform great a year from now or 2 years from now. If you want to keep using it, these are the type of cameras that you can really push for years to come because they're so good out of the box today, and they're still going to be great 2 years from now. Camera technology and sensor technology is going to slow down. It's not exponential like it was back in the day. It's a slow field. Stuff doesn't move crazy fast in terms of major leaps. Sure, there's some quality of life stuff like autofocus changes and low light capabilities, but for the most part, a good camera today is still going to be good and perform well 5 years from now if you know what you're doing, if you know how to use lighting, if you know how to use audio, if you know how to use all of those things, you're going to get good results out of anything. So remember that before you go out and feel like you got to go buy that next camera. I tell this to myself all the time. Do I get good results now? Yes. Is it because of the gear, or is it because I know what I'm doing in my skills in the field? Depending on the answer to that question, that should inform you whether you should go out and buy something new or not. If the gear is holding you back, that's one thing. But if your skills are holding you back, buying that new camera is not going to fix your lack of skills. So always remember that when you go buy a new camera. But for me, I'm content with the R6 Mark II, and I've absolutely loved it as my go-to hybrid camera for this year. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for always checking out these videos. And you guys may have noticed I've been posting a lot of shorts lately. I've been posting more reels and TikTok and stuff like that. I hate shooting vertical, but I'm trying to jump into the short form game. So if you're not following me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok, or subscribe here on YouTube, hit that button, man. Go follow me. My links are all in the description. I'd love to connect with you over there and have you see those short form content that I put out, because sometimes it's some fun, quick projects that may never make it to full-length YouTube videos. So make sure you hit the follow button and subscribe so you don't miss that. Also, if you like the way I color grade my footage, I have a C-Log 2 LUT pack that I've built from the ground up for sale. Link is in the description on that. If you use the code FIXITINPOST, you get a 25% off discount, so make sure you use that. And by the way, a C-Log 3 pack is coming soon for all my R5, R6, R8 users. people out there that have a C-Log 3 capable camera, I have a LUT pack coming for you as well. It'll be a very similar pack, but just geared towards C-Log 3 as opposed to C-Log 2. So if you like that one, you're going to like this one for C-Log 3. So be on the lookout for that. I'll let you guys know when that goes live. I'm working on it right now. I'm trying to make sure it's good, make sure it's right. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Appreciate you guys. I'll catch you in the next one.